As a small business owner, he served as the president and medical director of Specialized Medical Operations, Inc., a corporation dedicated to providing quality medical training, consulting, and operational support to law enforcement, EMS, and military special operations. Dr. Heck has lectured and published widely on special operations, medical support, the medical response to acts of terrorism, and emergency preparedness and response. Dr. Heck represented the Nevada State Senate, District 5 from 2004 through 2008, serving on the Natural Resources, Human Resources and Education, and the Commerce and Labor Committees, and as Vice Chair of the Transportation and Homeland Security Committee at that time. Dr. Heck has more than 25 years experience in public service as a physician, Army reservist, and community volunteer. He was previously a volunteer firefighter, an ambulance attendant, search and rescue team member, and SWAT physician, a colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves. He was called active duty 3 times, including deployment to Iraq in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
And I like long walks on the beach, little parasol breaks.
Oh, that's page 2.
Okay.
So basically, since 2010, Joe has represented us in the newly, at that time, newly formed 3rd Congressional District for Nevada. We now have 4. So that shows our growth, I guess. And he has, he's a 2-term, hopes to be a 3-term congressman supporting us. And he is here to speak to us on medical issues having to do with all kinds of things like SGR and GME and all kinds of nice abbreviations. And we're hoping to be able to pepper him with questions when we're finished. So thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Howard. Well, thank you all, and thanks very much for the opportunity to come and talk. It's nice to be at a town hall where there's not a bunch of trackers with video cameras in the back getting ready to splice everything that I say into a TV commercial. So many friends, that are here, having practiced in Nevada since 1992. So it's great to be back and see some of the folks that I kind of grew up with in the House of Medicine here in Southern Nevada. I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about 2 issues primarily, and then open it up to questions, because it's a town hall, and the whole idea behind a town hall is for you guys to be able to ask me questions. And actually, they're the 2 things that Howard brought up, which are the 2 areas primarily that I've been concentrating on since getting elected to Congress, which is SGR and GME. SGR was one of the primary things that I started working on when I first got elected in 2010, got to Washington in 2011. And so the issue, as everybody here knows, is this ongoing patch, the SGR coming up every year for renewal, nobody knowing what's going to happen. Are we going to take the cut? Are we going to have to start to prepare to lay people off, curtail our practices? And so it was apparent that there was really no sincere appetite in Washington to try to address this issue. Everybody was very happy just to just do another patch and don't worry about the cuts. The problem is that over the course of the last 12 years, we spent about $157 billion on short-term patches to SGR, and we still haven't fixed the underlying problem. So in an act of bipartisanship, it does exist in Washington. It's hard to find, but it really does exist. Myself and Allison Schwartz, who's a congresswoman from outside of Philadelphia, got together and came up with what was the first attempt at repeal and replace SGR. And so we introduced that in early 2011. And it raised a lot of eyebrows. So a lot of people weren't happy with everything that was in it, which is usually the case when you introduce a bill in Washington. Some people didn't like the policy, some people didn't like the pay for, but the key was it started a conversation that wasn't being had to that point, because everybody was like, don't worry about it, we're just going to do another extension when the next one expires. And so we were able to, and I think this is critically important, get the House of Medicine all on one message. Okay? Because you know what it's like. I mean, we all go to the doctor's room, into the doctor's lounge, and we all complain about everything. And then we leave and nothing ever really gets done because we all go off in our separate directions. And so I realized after being in Congress, that every specialty has their fly-in, where they bring in representatives of that specialty and they come visit their members of Congress and they talk about the issues that are important to that specialty. So what we tried to do was to get all of the groups to say the issue that you're going to talk about when you come this time is SGR. Okay? Because no matter what your specialty is, no matter what your area of practice is, we're all affected by SGR. And this way there was one message that was being pushed out to the members of Congress. Realizing that there's only about, there's about 18 members in the House that are physicians or healthcare providers. So the vast majority of people in the House have no idea what SGR is. I can tell you that There's some members within the doctor's caucus that really have no idea about SGR. But we decided, we have to have a unified message. This was an advertising campaign, right? You've got to have persistence to get penetration. You got to have penetration in order to make a change. And so we were successful in doing that. And when every specialty group came for their fly-in in 2012, the number one issue that they all talked to their congressperson about was, you got to fix SGR. And so then there was an interest, because now everybody was talking about it. Ultimately, our bill didn't make it across the finish line, but we reintroduced the bill again in January of 2013. And we changed the policy a little bit, and we changed it. Actually, we decided we weren't going to pay for it. We just took the pay for out, because nobody liked the pay for anyway. And we said, let's continue the dialogue. And when the fly-ins happened again in the spring of 2013, everybody was talking about SGR yet again. And ultimately, we got to the point where we were able to get the Ways and Means Committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee to want to tackle SGR. So we wound up getting a bill. And I think for the most part, we got the policy right. Now, this was a very difficult topic to address. Not only did we have to have the Ways and Means Committee, which is the folks that worry about the money end of it, and the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is the folks that worry about the policy end of it, in the House agree, but then we had to go over to the Senate and get Senate Finance and their Health Committee to agree that this was the way we were going to go. We got the policy done. We actually had both parties, both campuses, everybody agreed that the policy is as good as it's going to get, and this is the way we need to go to replace SGR with a more sustainable formula. And then it got to the difficult part of how are you going to pay for it. And we felt that this was the most opportune time because the Congressional Budget Office had dropped what the previous cost was to pay off the SGR. And so all this time that we've not been making the cuts, it's been accumulating a debt. And that hole has to be filled in. And so it was previously up over about $200 billion. This year it would have been about, I'd say only $130 billion. Right? Washington is the only place you can use billion and only in the same sentence. So $130. So we could have had SGR fixed. It was a fire sale. Let's get it while the going's good. But still, it was a hard time getting people to agree on what the pay for should be. I went with I really don't care if we pay for it. The fact is, we have paid $157 billion over the last 12 years not fixing it. If we don't fix it, odds are we're going to pay another $157 billion over the next 12 years not fixing it. So if we don't pay for it, and it only costs us $130, my math is we just saved $27 billion over 10 years by not paying for it. So let's do that. That was a hard sell. Then there was this thing about using more money, overseas contingency operation money, because as we draw down operations overseas, the money that's been budgeted, which wouldn't really say budgeted, but allocated towards paying for the war effort, isn't all going to be used. So there's this leftover money on paper. So we said, well, let's try to direct some of that money to pay down the SGR. And some folks say, well, that wouldn't work because that's just a gimmick. It's just money on paper, it's not real money. And I said, but the SGR is just a gimmick. So why don't we pay for a gimmick with a gimmick and call it even and let's move on? That didn't go over well either. So then what ultimately wound up going into the House version of the bill, unfortunately, and I called out a bunch of folks on this, was a partisan pay for. It was something that we knew that the Senate would not pass. So we had the right policy. Everybody agreed on the policy, but we had a pay for that we knew the Senate wasn't going to use. The SGR bill passed out of the House with that pay for in it, and it went over to the Senate where it's sitting. Unfortunately, nothing happened prior to the next expiration date, which was March 31st, and so we wound up with another one-year short-term patch. My request to the Senate was, look, I talked to Senator Reid about it. I said, look, I know you guys don't like this. I don't like it either. Just pass something with your own pay-for in it. It'll be a pay-for that we don't like, but then we go to conference and we sit around the table and we figure it out and we hash it out and hopefully come up with an answer. Maybe it's half overseas contingency operation money, maybe it's half of our pay-for, but we need to sit across the table and work this out. And unfortunately, we haven't gotten there. Now, all because we have a one-year patch doesn't mean that the discussion is stopped. We're still trying to get this across the finish line before this extension expires next March. My guess is that if we do get it done, it'll probably be at post-election in the infamous lame duck Congress that happens between the election time and the end of the year. But it's something that I've been committed to and something that we've worked on really hard in trying to move the policy along. So I still hold out hope that we'll get it done, hopefully this year. If not, by the end of this year, then before the next expiration in March 31st. But again, the hardest part was getting the policy done. And everybody's pretty much agreed on policy. So that's the first issue. The second issue, so thinking that SGR was done, because that's what consumed my last 3 years, it was like, okay, now what's the next issue? And my next issue was graduate medical education. So I went to my healthcare legislative assistant and said, okay, SGR is done, you can stop working on that. Now your project for this year is to solve GME. And she looked at me and said, I'm still, got the arrows in my back from trying to work on SGR. Give me a chance to heal. And I said, no, there's no chance to heal. We got to start working on GME. And so that's where we're at now. And so she's done a comprehensive